So how many of you here yesterday when Mark Lamb was talking? Yeah. Y'all ready to hear him again? I don't think I need to introduce him again. Sheriff Mark Lamb, Pinal County Sheriff, at least for a little bit longer. He's going to be coming up right now. Maybe if he's done talking to Chris.
I was talking election stuff with Chris back there. So, you know, everybody loves a good sheriff story, right? So we'll tell a sheriff story. So, especially this time of year, I think it's appropriate. A bunch of politicians were going from town to town, and they were doing their stumping. And they would all jump on the same bus. And they decided to take some back roads because the main road was closed, so they took some back roads through one of these old farms. Well, the bus ends up crashing, flipping over. All the bodies fall out of the bus. And this old farmer comes up on the bus on his old farm road and sees all these bodies laying there. And so he gets them, scoops them up, takes them, throws them in the pit, and covers it up. A couple days later, the sheriff comes out and says, "Hey, Bob, did you see a bus come through here?" He said, "Well, yes, I did." He said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, it crashed on that old farm road of mine." He said, "Well, what happened to all the bodies?" He said, "Well, I picked them up and put them in the pit." He says, "Were they all dead?" And he said, you know, some are saying they're alive, but they're politicians. You can't trust them. So there's a good sheriff story. Look, folks, we're in some crisis. You know, I listened to Chris talk about the elections. I'm going to try to touch a little bit on the border, COVID. All of these things are real crisis, but they're not the first time we've been through crisis in this country. Like, we've been built on crisis in this country. Thomas Paine, if you don't know who he was, wrote a book called Common Sense, which isn't so common anymore, right? Common sense, when you listen to all these elections things, what does common sense say? Put them in jail. Put them in jail, right? One day voting, show up with your ID, you get one ballot. Like, we're talking about addresses. The only reason those addresses matter is because they want to send ballots to it. But if you had to show up to vote, the common sense, which, by the way, every other country in the world gets but us, the common sense says one day voting. Or the common sense on the border, which I'll talk about. What is common sense? When they were trying to pass that bill, I'm going to try to cut mine short so we can get Shane Krauser up here sooner than later, because Shane is phenomenal. Common sense, and Grady Judd actually kind of brought this up. When they were doing this border bill, have you heard about this bipartisan border bill? Well, first of all, it was not bipartisan. They got a couple Republicans to sign off on it. The reality was it was a horrible bill, and it codified into law a lot of bad behavior. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things was they were going to allow 2,500 people a day for 7 days straight. That's the number you had to hit. And then at that point, they would shut it down. And Grady Judd said, well, if you can shut it down at 2,500 or 2,500 for 7 days, you can also shut it down at 0. And what is the common sense acceptable number? 0. 0 laws being broken. You know, I get in front of some of the people on the left and I'll say, I'm the sheriff. And if somebody were out robbing stores, at what point should I say I'm going to cut it off at this many robberies? Right. If I allowed you to rob 2,500 stores and then I said, hey, I'm going to finally enforce the law, you owe it to the American people because it's against the law to start it at 0. That's the number. That's the acceptable common sense number. But anyway, I digress. I got way off the beaten path. Thomas Paine wrote this book called Common Sense. One of the other things he wrote, when the Americans decided they were going to fight against the English, obviously a lot of people did not want to do this. It goes back to that conformity. The majority of the colonists said, hey, we're okay with the English take advantage. We're okay if we give up a little bit more, give up a little bit more. Some of the founding fathers said, we're not. Thomas Paine was one of those. But Thomas Paine knew that they needed to motivate these Americans to get out and fight against it. And so he wrote a series of pamphlets over a series of years called The American Crisis. And in there he wrote, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he who stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. I'm here to tell you, we have some major crises in this country. COVID was clearly a real, I was just telling Bill in the background, I was one of those guys that said, look, I don't think the American people will go for this. I was shocked when I saw how many Americans not only went for it, but fought for it. They wanted people like me who were against the COVID vaccines, against the mask mandates, against the lockdowns. If they could have thrown me in jail, they would have. Most people, when they think, oh, this is the sheriff that said he wouldn't enforce the stay-at-home order, they just think that was it, right? I said that and nobody else bothered me. You'd be very different. I fought every day with everybody. I fought with the schools. I fought with the athletic commissions. I fought with the liquor boards. I fought with everybody. When I said I wasn't going to do the stay-at-home order, the citizens loved it because they would come shop in my county. And then furthermore, I said, we're not doing the masks either. I ran into a lady one time. I could tell you stories all day long about COVID and the fights that I had with people. But one day I was standing, I'm trying to decide if I want to tell this story yet. Okay. I'll tell this story now, even though it happened after. But I'm standing in this post office, my wife and I'm not wearing a mask. She's not wearing a mask. Everybody in there is. And this lady's just looking at me, just glaring at me. And finally, the lady looks at me, and it was the wrong day for this. She looks at me and she says, "You're that no mask wearing sheriff, aren't you?" And I looked at her, and in this tone of voice, I said, well, I'm the sheriff who chooses not to wear a mask, if that's what you're asking. And she said, well, my husband and I just think it's so disrespectful that you don't wear a mask. And I said, you know what I find disrespectful? The fact that you think that you can challenge me like this in public. Who do you think you are? I said, I didn't come in here and challenge you about not wearing a mask. What on earth makes you more self-righteous than me that you think you can challenge me about not wearing a mask? I said, ma'am, you want to talk about disrespectful? That is disrespectful. And my wife's over in the corner like shuffling paper. If she could have got any smaller in the corner of the post office, she would have. And she looked at me and she said, you know what? You're right. She said, and I said, ma'am, nobody likes this. But challenging one another for our personal decisions is not only inappropriate, it's borderline illegal. And so what you can do is just respect other people's decisions to do it. I choose not to do this, and I respect your decision to come in here and wear a mask. And I appreciate that you recognize that what you did was not right. And at the end, she said, you know, look, I'm glad you politely put me in my place. But she ran into a buzzsaw that day. But you know, for the most part, I went everywhere. I flew all over during COVID. And granted, when you get on the plane, here's part of being a constitutionalist. You also have to recognize that businesses have their right to run their business the way they want to run it. And so if a business chooses to not let you in with no mask, is that not their right as well? So I would make a conscientious choice so that I could share my message. I would get on a plane. I wouldn't put the mask on until I walked on the plane, and the second I walked off the plane, I took it off. In that time, I had one lady ask me in an airport, I coughed a little bit, and she goes, can you put on a mask, please? And here, no offense, but she was not of the best health. And I wanted to turn around and say to her, first of all, I just turned around and I looked at her, I said, no. That's all I said. But I wanted to say, oh, health matters now? Like now all of a sudden you've decided that you're going to pay attention to your body and your health. But I didn't. I was a better man that day. And, but this is what I face nonstop. So I get COVID and I go to the White House. No, I'm in the middle of a campaign and I decide I'm going to give all these yard signs away. And so I had been delivering them to people's houses. My wife said, you can't do this. We have 800 requests for yard signs. So finally we said, well, we're going to do a yard sign giveaway. So we do it at the parking lot of a Home Depot. And I'm not wearing a mask. Nobody is. We had 600 people show up for this. So this is on like June 2nd of, COVID's still like in its height. And I go through the day, I go home the next day, and I get a phone call, and it's from DC, and they said, hey, the president would like you to come to the White House. He's going to be signing a bill, and he wants you to be in the Rose Garden with him. I was like, hell yeah, I'll be there. But I wasn't feeling real great. So the next day, Monday, I go into the office. I have a little meeting. I tell the guys, hey, I'm going to DC tonight. I take a red eye. I get into DC. I wasn't feeling real great. Not super sick, but I wasn't feeling good. So I take Dayquil. I go to the White House. They take your temperature. I pass. I'm like, good. I get inside, and I'm thinking I'm clear now. They do the little tickle test, And they said, hey, if we don't tell you in about 7 to 8 minutes, if you don't get a call in 10 minutes, you're good. About 7 minutes, my phone rings from DC. They're like, hey, Sheriff, you have COVID. You need to come back down to the infirmary. I was like, you're kidding. Nobody knew anybody that actually had COVID at this point. So I go back downstairs. Now all of a sudden I'm a pariah. Nobody wants to stand by me. They put on a mask. And I go inside, and I'm sitting in the infirmary, which was pretty cool because it had the seat had the seal of the president on it. So I'm like taking pictures. But I knew my day was done. They gave me the test where they touch your brain. And they come back, and they said it's going to take about 45 minutes. In the meantime, I'm looking for rental cars because I know that if I fly home, the media, when they find out that I have COVID, is going to crucify me. So I look for rental cars. They come back 45 minutes later. They say, hey, yeah, you have COVID. I'm like, dang. So like I said last night, if you weren't here last night, they legit took me out the back like a two-bit whore. They were so embarrassed that they let me in there. So I'm out the back of the White House. I've been to the White House 10 times. I've never been out that entrance or that exit. I go out, and I go straight to the hotel. I get a rental car. I start to drive home. I have to make a few phone calls to the people I had meetings with that Monday. Within 12 hours, somebody ratted me out to the media. And let me tell you, the messages that I got were absolutely atrocious. A few days into I made it home, a few days into my quarantine, my wife comes into me, and she would sit in the laundry room, and I was in the casita, and I could see she was very disturbed. And I looked at her, and I said, what's going on? And she said, I can't with these messages. I can't. And I said, honey, this is not your mantle to bear. Stop looking at those messages. Turn it off. This is mine. Don't worry about it. Who cares what these people say? And so when you stand up for what is right, it is not easy. It will come with criticism. But I love what Aristotle says. Aristotle says, the only way to avoid criticism is to do nothing, say nothing, or be nothing. And I refuse to not do anything. I refuse to not say anything. And I damn sure refuse to not be anything. I actually had an interview while I was in 2 calls I'm going to tell you about real quick while I was in quarantine. The first one was from the media. So I'm doing this Zoom and I'm in quarantine, and they're like, well, Sheriff, now that you have COVID, because it was all over the front page of Politico, the New York Times. It was on the front page of Africa News. Sheriff who refuses governor's orders gets COVID. And the reporter says to me, they're like, will you change your stance now on masks? And I said, no. Why would I change? I accepted the risk that I might get sick for my freedom. That's okay with me. And I'm okay with that. So no, I'm not going to change my stance. And not only did I not change my stance, I was in quarantine when our county was deciding if they were going to pass a mask mandate. And I had to join that board meeting by phone. And I was hot. I said, don't you dare pass this. I will not enforce a single one of them, and I will pass every one of those calls onto your offices. I will not respond to one of these if you pass this. I will make sure that everybody, and I said, and my voice is much louder than your guys's, everybody knows you passed this, not me. And I will absolutely be so vocal against this. Ultimately, I think they decided 4-1 to not do a mask mandate. And to make a clear point, I got off of quarantine on day 14. Day 15 was a board meeting. I showed up to that board meeting with no mask on. Everybody knew I just got off COVID. Everybody in there, every single person had a mask on. And me, proud as a peacock, walked in there, sat down. After the meeting, they called my chief and they said, do you think you could tell the sheriff to wear a mask next time? And my chief says, I'm not telling the sheriff anything. And I'm certainly not telling him to wear a mask. You guys know what you have. And I mean, I told the county I was the boogeyman for a long time there. So COVID was but to me, I could see what COVID is. Look, there has been an effort for the history of this country for them to take your power, your freedom. You know, I mentioned the scripture last night, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I'm going to talk about the power first. Do you guys know why zebras have stripes? I'm going to tell you anyway, so even if you know, I'm still going to tell you. So the scientist wants to understand why zebras have stripes. Some people say it's camouflage for their surroundings, but that's not true. A lion is tan. It could be like 2 feet in front of you. You wouldn't see it. A zebra you can see from a mile away. So he wants to understand this. So he goes out. He's watching this big herd of zebras out in the field, and he's looking at one of the zebras, and he looks down to make a note, and when he looks back up, the zebra's gone. He mixed in with all the other zebras. So the guy's like, okay, I got an idea. I'm going to take this can of red paint tomorrow. I'm going to take my Jeep. I'm going to drive out. I'm going to paint an X on the butts of a few of these zebras. So the next day, he gets his Jeep, takes his paint, goes out, paints an X on the butts of a few of the zebras, and comes back, thinks he's pretty slick. You know, he's like, this is going to be good. Gets up the next morning to go check on those zebras. Guess what? The predators ate those zebras with the red X. What he realized is that predators could not hunt the entire herd. They had to be able to identify one of the zebra to be able to go after them. They had to divide them. What he also realized is that the zebra stripes were not camouflage for their surroundings. They were camouflage for each other. It's the we the people principle. The power of the zebra herd was the power. As long as they could stand together, the predators could not isolate them and eat them. And mind you, we're not being hunted today by lions. We're being hunted by jackals and hyenas. That's who are hunting us. And you still need zebras like me that'll paint a big red X on my own butt and walk out in the field and get their attention. You still need that. But the power of this country, I recently, as you know, I lost my race for Senate, which means I could only run for one thing, which means my term for sheriff, sadly, will come to an end at December 31st. And I did a radio interview with somebody recently, and they said, what next? And he said, you've done a lot of things. And I said, Sheriff Lamb has a big voice and a lot of power. Senator Lamb would have had a lot of power as well. But it doesn't compare to the power that Citizen Lamb has. The voice that we as citizens have in this country is far greater than those goofs that we continue to put back in positions in Washington, D.C. or wherever else it is. The question is, can we stand together enough? Can we grab that power, harness the power to use it in a way that benefits us? So taking our power back is one of the things, and that means standing together as a people. Second, which is why they divide us on race, religion, politics. COVID was a big, they achieved more with COVID, not just taking our freedoms. They divided families, they divided churches, they divided all sorts of things. It was very effective for them. The second thing is love. You know, this country is a country that is known for helping others, much to our own demise. We are a little bit too caring sometimes, I think. But there's a quote that's erroneously attributed to Alexis de Tocqueville, if you don't know who he was. He was quoted last night by Pastor Clark. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman sent here in the early 1800s by the French government to understand the American penal system and the American Constitution. And in the books, he wrote a series of books called Democracy in America. This quote is attributed to him. I don't know that I can find it in those books, but it says, and I love the quote nonetheless, it says, "I searched America for her greatness and genius in her commodious harbors and in her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and in her boundless prairies, and it was not there. In her rich mines and in her vast world commerce, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America did I not until I went into the churches of America and discovered her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand her greatness and power. America was great because she was good. And if America ever ceased to be good, America will cease to be great." Our goodness is because of love. There is a darkness in this world, and it is increasingly enveloping America. And how goes America, so goes the rest of the world. If we don't instill the light back in this country, there is no way to dispel darkness. When they walk in this room in the morning and it's completely dark, they do one thing. They turn on the lights. We need to turn on the light back in this country. While we may not agree with these people, you must meet it with love. Not tolerance, not acceptance for bad behavior, but love nonetheless towards people who are obviously sons and daughters of God. We must instill the love back in this country. And of course, the last is to be of a sound mind. You guys know what a flashbang is? Flashbang is a little grenade, but there's no shrapnel. It's a little canister. We use it when we serve search warrants. You pull the pin, you throw it in, boom. It's a loud noise, it's a bright light, and it's got percussion in it. So it's designed to take away your hearing temporarily, your vision, and discombobulate you. We have been flashbanged. And if you don't get your wits about you real quick, you're going to be taken over. They're going to take us over. And the way you got to do this is to control your mind. How many of you get up in the morning, look at all this stuff, and even today when we see some of the stuff, the hard facts that Chris presents to us, do you not get pissed off? Every day when you watch the news, do you not get up and go, "Oh my God, I'm going to kill these people"? That is by design. Because if you're angry, I love the fight game. I love UFC, boxing. If you can control the pace of the fight, you'll win most likely. If you can get them angry and off their game, the chances of us winning, if they can get us off their game, is low. We cannot let the emotions play a part in this. This is about understanding what you can control and what you can't control. I have 5 children. December 16th of 2022 was probably one of the catalysts for me running for office. I went out and I was doing some Christmas shopping. My wife was doing some Christmas shopping. My middle child, he had a fiance and an 11-month-old daughter. My son went to work, and at 8:30 at night, my wife and I are sitting at home, and we get a knock at the door. We open the door, and it's the sheriff from the neighboring county 2 of my chiefs and 2 guys from Gilbert PD. And one of my chiefs has known my kids since they were little kids. And he just looked at me, and the only thing he could say was, Cooper and the baby are dead. Like that, I lost my 22-year-old son, my 11-month-old granddaughter, and my daughter-in-law died a few days later from somebody driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Killed all 3. I carry a gun, I carry a badge. There was nothing I could do to stop that. So the question is, was I going to let that get me off my game, or was I, which it did, or was I going to pull up my bootstraps, get my wits about me, and understand that I couldn't control that? Most of the unhappiness and anger and frustration in this world, especially when it comes with government, is outside of our control. We're trying to control an outcome that we have no control over. You must surrender the outcome. You must work on what you can, do what you can where you can, and the rest of it we have to surrender the outcome. The receiver can't throw the ball to himself. He's got to run his route and hope that the quarterback throws the ball where it's supposed to be. You're supposed to hope that the blocker does his block. We have to hope and have faith that each one of us will do our part. And the rest, you got to surrender the outcome. And you cannot let them get you out of your mind. You've got to stay in control of your mind. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. If you think that you can't make a difference, and you don't think that you have the same American spirit in each and every one of you as the next 2 stories I will tell. I thought I was going to end early. Sorry, Shane. The first one is Samuel Whittemore. I don't know if you know who Samuel Whittemore is, but Samuel Whittemore was a 78-year-old man. Ironically, he's the same age as President Trump. So when I tell you this story, you think of the comparisons. 78-year-old man, and he had heard that the English were marching on Concord. Well, when the English, they were rebuffed, there was enough Americans there to kind of push the English back. Samuel Whittemore, a veteran of the French and Indian Wars, of the French Wars. As a matter of fact, he had taken a sword from one of those Frenchmen. He goes to his house. When he hears the English are coming, he loads his rifle. He loads his 2 pistols. He takes his sword that he'd taken from the Frenchmen, and he goes out into the path where he knows they're coming back. He sits behind a wall, and as the English gets close enough, he pulls up his rifle, boom, shoots one of them, kills one of them. Then he pulls out his 2 pistols, boom, boom, takes out 2 more. Then he pulls out his sword, and as he does, they're now charging him. They shoot him in the face. Then they run up on him. They hit him with the butts of their rifles and bayonet him at least 6 to 7 times. When they left and moved on, they left him laying in a pool of blood. When the Americans came across him an hour later, Samuel Whittemore was trying to load his guns. Samuel Whittemore lived 18 more years after that and died at the age of 96 years old. I'm going to tell you my favorite story, though. And this is the story of General Mad Anthony Wayne, because I think this embodies America to its core. General Mad Anthony Wayne was one of General Washington's favorite generals, and the war was not going good. They'd been losing. It wasn't great. And finally, this was actually July 16th. George Washington comes to General Mad Anthony Wayne. He says, look, we lost Stony Point. Do you think you can take it back? I know that you're outnumbered. Do you think you can take it back? And he says, sir, you issue the order, I'll storm hell. So they decide to come up with this plan. They're going to get an advantage. They attack at night. He doesn't just go pick anybody. He says, let me pick who I take. He goes and picks 1,200 men, the best of the best from each regiment. They fixed the bayonets on their guns. They didn't put any balls in their guns. They put little white feathers on their hats so they could tell each other apart. They came in, when the sun went down, they decided to attack. And at some point, the balls do start to fly, and General Mad Anthony Wayne gets struck in the head. Boom! And goes down. His men come running over to him, and he says, men, carry me into that fort. Instead of turning around, they continue to push forward. They took that fort, capturing, I think, 478 English, killed 15, wounded a bunch more, and they had only lost 13 Americans that day. That's the type of men that we need in this country. But what was most important was the letter that he wrote to General George Washington at 2 a.m. in the morning after they took the fort. And he only wrote 2 lines. He said, General Washington, the fort and garrison with Colonel Johnston is ours. Our officers and our men behave like men who are determined to be free. So my question is, will we behave like men and women determined to be free, or will we continue to lose the freedoms that men like Samuel Whittemore and Abraham Clark and all these other great patriots fought so valiantly to give us, that we are handling so carelessly now? So when people ask me why I am the sheriff that I am, it's because I understand the sacrifice and the cost of freedom. We dumped the tea in the harbor in 1773. We wrote the Constitution and we ratified it in 1787. The fighting went on till 1783. Think about how hard it will be to get it back if we lose it. Think about the sacrifice it'll take to get it back if we lose it. I'm going to leave you with one scripture. Because when all else fails, when all else other stuff, and we take the power of the love and the sound mind, there's a scripture that I love that's my favorite scripture, and it's Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. It says, wherefore, seeing we are encompassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth easily beset us. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was placed before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. My prayer as I leave here today is that God grant us the same faith and strength and courage exhibited by those patriots of old who pledged their lives and their fortunes that we might be free. God bless all of you for being here. God bless all of you patriots for fighting for this country. And God bless America.
Thank you.